Leslie Casey here, and welcome back to part two in regards to changes in the workplace and advocacy. This section in part two, we're going to deal with the definitions in section 5, individual flexibility arrangements. That's what it's called under the award, and it's under the definition section, but it's very useful, so I thought we would have a bit of a look-see. Under section 5.2 of the award, it says an agreement must be one that is genuinely made by the employer and the individual employee without coercion or duress. In other words, they just can't bully you into accepting their terms and conditions, because that would be in breach of the award. An agreement may only be made after the individual employee has commenced employment with the employer. This is not exactly the agreement, for example, when you first start with your employer and they give you a contract of employment, or a letter of offer is another term for it, for you to peruse and sign. So this is after the employee have entered the workplace and either you or your employer wants to negotiate different terms and conditions of your employment. An employer who wishes to initiate the making of an agreement must A. give the employee a written proposal, and B. if the employer is aware that the employee has, or reasonably should be aware, that the employee may have limited understanding of written English, the employer needs to take reasonable steps, including providing a translation in the appropriate language, to ensure that the employee understands the proposal. Section B is really covering people from a culturally and linguistically diverse background whose English may not be enough to fully understand what is actually being proposed. An agreement must result in the employee being better off overall at the time of the agreement is made than if the agreement has not been made. In other words, basically the employer cannot make an employee agree to terms and conditions of their employment which would see them worse off than if they remained under the award, and also that the agreement hadn't been made in the first place. 5.5 is very key and a very important section for individual employees to understand, that they can't be made worse off as a result of entering into an agreement. And if you do find that you are made to be worse off, then you are fully entitled to, as the employee, not to consent to the actual agreement, that the change that the employer wants to make. The agreement must do all of the following, and please note this, it says all of the following, not just one or two or some of them. So the agreement must state the names of the employer and the employee. It needs to identify the award term or award terms that the application for the agreement to be varied is. So it needs to set out the clauses in the agreement as to what they are in the award, and it also needs to set out how the application of the award term or each award term is varied. Basically, in other words, what do they want to do? What is the actual change? D, the agreement must also set out how the agreement results in the employee being better off overall at the time the agreement is made than if they had not entered into the agreement itself, and state the date that the agreement is to start. In other words, they can't just throw a piece of paper under your nose as an employee, say on Wednesday, and demand on Thursday that the agreement starts. You have to be given time to review the agreement, have a look at it, do your own research if you need to, think through whether you will be better off as an employee or whether you will be worse off, and then come back to the table. They need to then, once all that's done, they need to, when it starts. So the agreement is in writing and is signed by both the employer and the employee. If the employee is under 18 years of age, by the employee's parent or guardian. And this is really important. So both signatures must appear on this actual agreement that is varying the terms and conditions or aspects of the role of your employment. 5.8, except as provided in clause 57B, in other words, that a parent or a guardian needs to sign the agreement alongside the employer, the agreement must not require the approval or consent of a person other than the employer and the employee. So this is the individual agreements. This is not to do with the collective agreements, or as they're termed in the award and in the Fair Work Act, the enterprise agreement. So they're a little bit different again. The employer must keep the agreement as a time and wages record and give a copy to you as the employee. The employer and you must genuinely agree without duress or coercion to any variation of an award provided for by an agreement. So they can't just say, sign this agreement or you lose your job. Nor can they say, if you don't sign it, we're going to reduce your hours, because that is duress and coercion. And you have a very good case to go to the Fair Work Ombudsman under those type of conditions and actually seek redress from the employer. Can an agreement be terminated? Yes. It can be terminated at any time by written agreement between the employer and the employee. And also, what has to happen though is that the employer or the employee needs to give 13 weeks written notice to the other party. So if the employer wants to cancel the agreement, they need to give you 13 weeks written notice. If you want to cancel the agreement, you need to give the employer 13 weeks notice that you want to cancel the written agreement. Now this is reduced to 4 weeks if the agreement was entered into before the first full pay period starting on or after the 4th of December 2013. Old agreements before the 4th of December 2013, you as the employee or your employer only has to provide 4 weeks notice. Under the current Contract Call Centres Award 2020, the written notice has to be 13 weeks. Now there is a little bit of a note in the award in regards to individual flexible arrangements, and if an employer and employee agree to an arrangement that purports to be an individual flexibility arrangement under the award term, and the arrangement does not meet a requirement set out in the Section 144 of the Fair Work Act 2009, then the employee or the employer may terminate the arrangement by giving written notice of not more than 28 days. Again, that's a little bit different. If you find that you have actually signed a written agreement, in other words, for a change in your conditions, and then you subsequently find out that basically it doesn't meet the Fair Work Act 2009 in sections 144 and also 145 of the Act, then you you only have to give 28 days notice to cancel it. But what you would need to do is put that in writing, stating the section 144, and I'll leave a link underneath the video of the Fair Work Act 2009. Put that out in writing, and that you would like to terminate the agreement because it breaches the actual legislation. 5.12 states an agreement terminated as mentioned in 5.11, so it's actually been terminated and the written notice has been given, ceases to have effect at the end of the period of the notice required under that clause. Unless it breaches the Fair Work Act, in other words, you have to give 13 weeks notice. But at the end of that 13, that agreement, you don't need to do any more. That agreement actually is now then null and void. And 5.13 says the right to make an agreement under the clause 5, additional to, and does not affect any other term of the award that provides for an agreement between an employer and an individual employee. So basically have the right to make an agreement, but it mustn't affect any other section of the Contract Call Centres Award 2020. If you want to look up these sections yourself, you can. I will leave the links underneath the video for you so that you can do that. Thank you. Bye for now.